I signed my soul over to a comatose shipping magnate because my grandfather's architectural firm went belly up, and his iron-willed matriarch promised to liquidate my family's staggering debts. Society viewed me as a tragic sacrificial lamb, the living widow, trapped in a gilded mausoleum. I didn't see it that way. My new husband, Julian Vance, was staggeringly handsome, utterly silent, never disputed my credit card statements, and never stayed out late with models. His mother, Eleanor, handed me an unlimited platinum card with the casual indifference of someone buying a premium streaming subscription she forgot to cancel. Honestly, it was the most peaceful domestic arrangement I could have ever dreamed of. So, every single evening, I dragged a velvet armchair to the side of his life support monitor and treated him like my personal, highly aesthetic therapist. I told him about the snobs who snubbed me, exactly how many thousands I spent on silk loungewear, which of his legacy hunting board members deserved a slow-acting poison, and how deeply unfair it was that a man who contributed 0 words to our relationship possessed a jawline that could slice glass. Then came Tuesday night. After recounting a particularly expensive shoe haul, I leaned over his pristine linens and whispered, "If you ever snap out of this, let's just collectively agree you heard absolutely none of that." Suddenly, 5 blunt fingers clamped firmly around my wrist. I froze so violently I think my ancestors felt the whiplash. The penthouse suite fell into a suffocating, terrifying quiet. Beside Julian's bed, the digital telemetry monitor kept pulsing its steady, rhythmic beep, completely indifferent to the fact that my husband had just shattered a 6-month streak of immaculate, peaceful silence. His grip wasn't crushing or painful, it was just heavy, warm, and undeniably real. I stared down at his pale knuckles, then slowly tracked up to his face. Julian still looked like a marble statue. Sleeping serene, unfairly blessed with thick eyelashes that frankly should have been subjected to luxury tax. "No," I whispered into the void. "Absolutely not. The contract clearly implied you were strictly decorative." His fingers subtly loosened. I practically catapulted backward out of my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. For half a year, Julian Vance had been the undisputed gold standard of husbands. Rich, beautiful, mute, and entirely unavailable for marital disputes. I had confessed every dark, embarrassing secret I possessed to this man. I had told him about the time I panicked so badly after using his mother's platinum card for a designer handbag that I returned it, bought a knockoff, and kept the digital receipt locked in a hidden cloud drive like evidence in a federal fraud case. If he had been conscious for even a fraction of my rambling, my life was effectively forfeit. Scrambling for my phone, I dialed Eleanor with shaking hands. She picked up on the second ring. "Maya? Is Julian's blood pressure spiking? Your son just initiated physical contact." Dead silence on the line. Then, the distinct shattering of a porcelain teacup. I heard frantic shouting, running footsteps, and Eleanor Vance's breathless, sharp voice cutting through the noise. "What exactly do you mean by contact, Maya?" His hand moved. He literally grabbed my wrist. "Are you certain it wasn't a muscle spasm?" "Eleanor, I am a deeply dramatic woman, but I know the difference between an involuntary twitch and a deliberate hold." Exactly 7 minutes later, Eleanor burst into the private medical wing wearing a tailored silk robe, leather slippers, and the wild, fragile expression of a matriarch who had spent 6 months praying for a miracle but was now utterly terrified of it. Behind her lunged Dr. Sterling, his tie askew, medical bag clutched tightly in his fist. He immediately went to work, checking Julian's pupillary responses, testing reflexes, monitoring brainwave spikes, and reviewing the digital charts. I stood pressed against the far wall, clutching Eleanor's arm. She was gripping my wrist back so hard her manicured nails left white indents. Dr. Sterling finally stepped back, adjusting his glasses. "The neurological activity is showing a definitive, sustained spike. This wasn't an autonomic reflex, Eleanor." Eleanor pressed her trembling hands to her mouth. "He's coming back?" "It's an incredibly early response, but yes. We need to monitor him around the clock. His brain is actively fighting to break through the fog." Eleanor broke down into silent, heavy tears, pulling me into a fierce embrace. "Maya, you did this. You sat with him every single night. You spoke to him when everyone else treated him like a ghost. You gave him a reason to return. I stiffened instantly in her arms. Oh, I had given him plenty of reasons, mostly involving highly actionable blackmail. While Eleanor was weeping with maternal joy, my internal monologue was screaming, "If your son opens his eyes, he is going to remember that I called him a gorgeous piece of high-end furniture investment." "What did you say to him all those nights, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked, wiping her eyes. "Just private marital nonsense," I squeaked out. Dr. Sterling cleared his throat politely to hide a smirk. Eleanor smiled through her tears, patting my cheek. "Then keep talking to him. Don't stop." Easy for her to say. She hadn't asked Julian whether, if our yacht capsized, he would save me first solely because Eleanor was wealthy enough to buy her own Coast Guard rescue fleet. That night, after the medical staff and Eleanor finally vacated the suite, I crept back to my designated chair. This time, I kept both of my hands firmly clamped in my lap, sitting as straight as a defendant in a high-profile corporate fraud trial. I leaned over the guardrail, lowering my voice to a razor-thin whisper. "Julian Vance. If you can actually hear me, do not move a single muscle. If you heard absolutely nothing over the last 6 months, remain perfectly still." The heart monitor suddenly doubled its tempo. Beep, 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 beep. I bolted upright, pointing an accusatory finger at him. "No, absolutely not. You are medically prohibited from using a heart monitor for sarcasm. Slow it down right now." The rhythm instantly leveled back out to a steady, mocking pace. I narrowed my eyes at the sleeping billionaire. This marriage was officially becoming a hostile work environment. 6 months ago, I never could have envisioned this pristine, clinical room becoming my ultimate sanctuary. Before I became the reluctant Mrs. Vance, I was Maya Sterling, the youngest heiress of the legendary Sterling architecture dynasty. I grew up with private tutors, custom-tailored blazers, a penthouse bedroom larger than most trendy downtown cafes, and a mother who constantly smelled of expensive French lavender and always told me, "Maya, if the aristocracy decides to be cruel, make sure your outfit is too flawless for them to look you in the eye." Then, the market crashed, our core investments imploded, and the universe took the wardrobe along with the dignity. My father vanished the night the bankruptcy papers were leaked. Some rumors claimed he fled to a tax haven, others whispered that his predatory board members had cornered him into something far worse. I stopped investigating because no answer was going to bring him back to the dinner table. My mother passed away barely 2 months later from what the hospital legally labeled cardiac arrest, but I called it heartbreak wrapped in corporate bureaucracy. The receivers seized Sterling Manor. Our lifelong family friends abruptly stopped answering my encrypted texts. Socialites who used to beg to borrow my vintage Chanel pieces were suddenly whispering that I was nothing but a spoiled, decorative liability. Predatory venture capitalists who used to call me little genius started offering me personal assistant roles with smiles that made my skin crawl. One rainy afternoon, I stood on the curb outside Sterling Manor watching movers catalog our family heirlooms. A sleek black sports car slowed down right in front of me. A girl I used to share a private box with at the opera rolled down the window, smirking. "Maya Sterling. What happened? Did the family carriage turn right back into a pumpkin?" I lifted my chin, staring directly through her designer sunglasses. "No, but your nose still looks like it was modeled after one." The window rolled up aggressively. It was a minor victory, but unfortunately, cutting insults didn't cover security deposits. Then came Eleanor Vance. She invited me to an exclusive tea room where a single pot cost more than my remaining monthly groceries. I arrived in my last undamaged designer dress, carrying the defensive posture of a woman ready to bite. Eleanor was the epitome of old-world grace, calm, calculating, and surprisingly warm. She didn't offer empty condolences. Instead, she slid a thick leather folder across the table. "My son Julian has been unresponsive for 6 months following a vehicular accident," she stated smoothly. "He requires legal protection." I blinked. From what? The man is unconscious. From board members and vultures who mistake silence for vulnerability, Eleanor countered. The Vance corporate empire has enemies, many of whom share our last name. I need someone legally bound to him. A wife. Someone I can trust entirely not to liquidate his assets for personal leverage. I stared at her. Mrs. Vance, my family is bankrupt. My current level of trustworthiness is directly tied to the holes in my shoes. Which is precisely why I selected you, Eleanor said, a faint smile playing on her lips. Because you have nothing left to lose but your pride. And you still look like you would challenge the table to a duel if it insulted your lineage. I respected her instantly. It was a dangerous sign. She offered a legal union to Julian. In exchange, the Vance estate would purchase Sterling Manor back from the receivers before it hit the auction block, provide a comprehensive trust fund for my older sister Clara, and grant me absolute financial immunity. Instead of taking offense, I asked the practical questions. Does the position include private quarters? Naturally. Full catering? Of course. Will Julian object? Her eyes dimmed slightly. He cannot. Compared to the desperate, predatory men who could speak, an elite shipping magnate in a temporary coma was a massive upgrade. So, I signed the registry. Our ceremony was private, held right in the medical wing. Eleanor shed quiet tears. I wore a tailored ivory dress she had rushed in from Milan, making me look less like a displaced orphan and more like a woman the upper crust hadn't managed to chew up yet. Julian lay motionless in his bed, a platinum band fitted to his left ring finger. I stood by his side and whispered, "Hello, Julian Vance. I'm Maya Sterling, your legally binding spouse. Please be an easy roommate. I am currently bankrupt and highly volatile." He offered no rebuttal. It was perfect. During that first week, I fully expected the staff to treat me like a high-end piece of paid scenery. Instead, Eleanor settled me into a gorgeous master suite adjacent to Julian's quarters, providing an entirely new wardrobe, an executive vehicle, and a Black American Express card. I held the metal card like a holy relic. "Eleanor, are you entirely certain about this? In this house, a Vance daughter-in-law does not count pennies while the rest of society watches," she replied firmly. "I only count pennies recreationally now," I admitted. "Then count these instead." I nearly wept. My mother-in-law had granted me financial sovereignty before my husband had managed to utter a single sentence. The Vance family had truly spectacular priorities. At first, I visited Julian out of pure obligation, then because Eleanor asked me to keep his mind active, and finally because talking to a silent billionaire became infinitely easier than interacting with people who could interrupt me. I told him absolutely everything. "Your cousin Victor stopped by today," I remarked one evening while smoothing out his cashmere blanket. "The man possesses the dynamic charisma of a damp cardboard box." He stared at me as if I were smuggling the family silver out in my handbag. I told him if I were planning a heist, I'd start with something significantly less tacky than his watch. Julian remained perfectly still. A flawless listener. An exemplary spouse. Another evening, I held up 2 designer gowns against the clinical light. Eleanor bought me both. The navy one screams, "Grieving, elegant widow." The emerald one says, "I may be bankrupt, but my bone structure is still superior." Blink once for emerald. No movement. Coward. Emerald it is. Sometimes I read him terrible, trashy romance novels from my tablet. The dominant CEO gripped her wrist, his voice dropping an octave as he growled, "Woman, you cannot escape my shadow." "Julian, let me be exceptionally clear. If you ever wake up and utter that sentence to me, I will launch this tablet directly at your nose." I possess very limited patience and surprisingly sharp elbows. No response. We were in total agreement. But sometimes, when the penthouse grew dark and my cache of sarcastic armor ran dry, I spoke the unvarnished truth. "I really miss my mother, Julian." The monitor gave a soft, rhythmic chime. I reached out, carefully touching the edge of his hand. "I know you can't answer. That's probably the only reason I'm brave enough to say it out loud." That was how Julian Vance became my involuntary diary, my quiet confidant, and my safest harbor. Then Victor Vance decided to disrupt my highly lucrative status quo. Victor was Julian's first cousin, and he patrolled the Vance estate like a building inspector waiting for the current owner to drop dead so he could demolish it. He wore overly tailored Italian suits, flashed a smile that featured entirely too many teeth, and addressed the domestic staff as if they were furniture equipped with ears. The first time he managed to corner me in the Eastern Gallery, he scanned me from head to toe with a condescending smirk. "Enjoying the massive lifestyle upgrade, Maya?" I offered a serene, practiced smile. "The climate control in this wing is truly magnificent, thank you." "You do realize Julian is never going to wake up, right?" "Fascinating," I replied, tilting my head. "Because even horizontal and unconscious, he still commands more executive authority than you do standing up." Victor's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "You should watch your step, little girl. The moment Eleanor grows bored of playing savior to a bankrupt socialite, you'll be out on the pavement with nothing." "Victor." Eleanor's voice clipped through the tension from the end of the corridor. She stood there framed by the archway, breathtakingly elegant in a cream wool suit, her eyes cold enough to freeze boiling water. "My daughter-in-law has my full backing," Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. "Which is already significantly more than you will ever possess in this company." Victor forced a tight, panicked laugh. "Aunt Eleanor, please." It was merely a light-hearted joke. Eleanor ignored him entirely, looking directly at me. "If Victor causes you any further inconvenience, Maya, simply inform me. I will handle it with far more diplomacy than you, but absolutely no mercy." I looked at Victor. Victor looked at his polished loafers. I deeply loved my mother-in-law. That night, I reported the entire interaction to my captive audience. "Your cousin is a parasitic mosquito, Julian. If you disagree, feel free to argue. No movement. No blink. Perfect. Our communication remains flawless." Suddenly, his index finger twitched against the sheet. I let out a sharp, undignified shriek. Eleanor sprinted into the room accompanied by 2 night nurses. Dr. Sterling arrived shortly after to run another diagnostic sweep. "Another definitive neurological motor response," the doctor confirmed, adjusting his spectacles. "He is actively fighting the sedation." Eleanor was weeping again. I stood near the window, my complexion matching the white curtains. Once the room cleared out, I marched back to his bedside and whispered fiercely, "If you just heard me call your cousin a parasite, that was a verified medical diagnosis." The cardiac monitor gave a single, sharp beep. I pointed a warning finger at him. "Do not encourage me." As the weeks bled into summer, I learned how to assist with his physical therapy. Initially, I was terrified of disrupting the complex array of medical tech, but the private nurses taught me how to adjust his alignment, how to apply emollient to his lips against the dry air, and how to speak to him without using the depressing tone people reserve for funerals. I made minor errors, of course. Once, I pulled the thermal blanket up entirely too high and panicked as if I had committed corporate espionage. Another time, I applied far too much protective balm and remarked, "Congratulations, Julian. You now look like a beauty influencer preparing for a sponsored close-up." His heart rate monitor spiked significantly. I froze. "If you are laughing at me internally right now, that is a direct violation of our marital boundaries." Eleanor, standing just outside the threshold, spent the next 30 seconds pretending to have a severe coughing fit. Public life, however, required a much thicker armor. Eleanor insisted I accompany her to the annual Vance Maritime Gala as the official Mrs. Julian Vance. The high society elite stared at me as if I were a ghost that had crashed the banquet. The displaced Sterling girl. The living widow. The bankrupt bride. A prominent tech heiress dripping in diamonds cornered me near the champagne tower. "How incredibly charitable of Eleanor to take you under her wing after your family's unfortunate liquidation." I offered a sweet, toxic smile. "Yes, it was quite a fall. Fortunately, I managed to land directly into a custom Maserati." Her smile withered instantly. A few feet away, a hedge fund manager whispered loudly to his companion, "She married a man who can't even speak back." I turned smoothly toward them, raising my glass. "Precisely. After a lifetime of interacting with men who speak entirely too much without saying anything of substance, I consider an articulate silence to be an absolute luxury." The immediate circle went dead silent. Eleanor raised her crystal goblet from across the room to conceal her grin. Victor was present as well, attempting to lead a toast to the firm's stability. My cousin Julian has always been a man of few words, but lately, he has truly mastered the art of non-interference. The laughter from his sycophants was ugly. I set my champagne glass down with a sharp clink that silenced the immediate tables. Victor, Julian drafted the international shipping routes that currently fund your entire lifestyle. You really shouldn't mock the architecture while begging to inherit the deed. The mockery evaporated. Eleanor looked at me with immense maternal pride. Victor looked like he wanted to drown me in the decorative ice sculpture. That night, I told Julian, I ran tactical defense for you today. Highly heroic behavior. If you wake up, you owe me an exorbitant arrangement of flowers. Not supermarket apology flowers, Julian. The expensive ones. His finger twitched against mine. This time, I didn't yell. I leaned closer, my heart thumping. Julian. Nothing. I swallowed the lump in my throat, squeezing his hand. If you're trying to come back, hurry up. Your relatives are getting louder, and I can't sweat these mosquitoes away by myself forever. The monitor beeped frantically. My eyes stung with sudden tears. Okay, I'll wait. My sister Clara came to visit the next morning. She looked dangerously thin, her heavy makeup doing a poor job of hiding her exhaustion. I knew my sister. She only wore full-coverage foundation when her life was actively falling apart. She hugged me fiercely. Maya, are you really okay here? I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Clara, I reside in a coastal fortress. My mother-in-law feeds me imported delicacies, and my husband physically cannot argue with me. I am frighteningly okay. Her eyes drifted toward Julian's room. You don't have to put on a brave face for me. I'm not pretending. The Vance family isn't a prison. It's a luxury shelter with a gorgeous, sleeping husband included. She still looked unconvinced. Then Eleanor stepped into the foyer. Clara, welcome. I've had high tea prepared. Maya mentioned you adore lemon tart. Clara blinked, stunned. You remembered that? Eleanor smiled warmly. Maya talks quite a bit. I listen. I froze. Wait. What exactly did I let slip? Enough to know that your brother-in-law, Philip Quinn, is an absolute idiot. Clara's face went entirely pale. I turned to her instantly. Clara, talk to me. She looked down, her voice trembling. I didn't want to burden you while you were restructuring your own life. It was already too late. Within the hour, Eleanor had summoned Victoria Lewis, the Vance family's chief legal counsel. Victoria arrived sporting a razor-sharp bob, a crimson case file, and the chilling composure of a woman who routinely dismantled predatory men before her morning espresso. Clara finally confessed everything. Philip had been secretly siphoning their marital assets into offshore shell companies. His mistress, a woman named Chloe Shaw, was currently living in a luxury penthouse Philip paid for. To make matters worse, Philip's mother had been aggressively pressuring Clara to accept the mistress's upcoming child to avoid public scandal, assuming that because the Sterling dynasty had collapsed, Clara had no leverage to fight back. Eleanor set her porcelain teacup down with a terrifyingly deliberate click. They calculated incorrectly. Victoria smiled, a cold, lethal expression. Exceedingly incorrectly. For the first time in months, Clara wept freely without apologizing. I held her tight while Eleanor ordered a private chef to prepare dinner and Victoria began drafting legal injunctions. I went to Julian's bedside that evening, absolutely incandescent with rage. Your mother is an absolute icon. If you wake up and turn out to be a disappointment, I will personally put you back into a medical coma. Not legally. Emotionally. Philip Quinn is a walking piece of human garbage. His mistress is pregnant and acting like she invented the concept of motherhood. If you were awake, I'd ask you to intimidate them with your executive glare. The monitor chimed. I sighed. Yes, I know. You glare effectively even while unconscious. The confrontation at the Quinn estate took place 3 days later. Clara walked through the grand double doors flanked by Victoria Lewis, Eleanor, and me. Philip looked utterly paralyzed. His mistress sat on the velvet sofa, cradling her stomach like a royal proclamation. Philip's mother stood up immediately, her pearls rattling. Clara? You brought outsiders into our private residence. Eleanor offered a serene, chilling smile. No. I brought consequences. Victoria casually slid a thick stack of financial audits onto the marble coffee table. Asset diversions, unauthorized penthouse leases, encrypted text logs, comprehensive proof that Philip had been unlawfully liquidating marital property. Philip's face drained of all color. The mistress whispered frantically, "Philip, what is this?" Clara looked directly at her husband, her voice trembling but remarkably clear. "I am entirely done being humiliated in a home where I was the only one who kept my vows." Philip lunged forward to grab her arm. I stepped squarely between them, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. "No physical contact. Your integrity has expired, Philip. Keep your distance." Eleanor placed a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. Philip's mother began shrieking about their social standing and family reputation. Eleanor cut her off with a look that could have halted a moving train. "Then you should have raised a son who didn't conduct his family logistics from another woman's bedroom." I had to actively restrain myself from applauding. Clara filed for absolute divorce that exact week. Philip lost the luxury estate he had attempted to conceal, and his mistress quickly discovered that the promises of a cheating man carry zero legal weight during asset division. Clara moved into the eastern guest wing of the Vance estate. When she tried to apologize for the inconvenience, Eleanor cut her off. "If either of you apologizes for requiring family protection again, I will sentence you both to mandatory retail therapy and bill Julian's personal account for it." I gasped. "Can I apologize right now just to test that theory?" Eleanor shot me a look, and I wisely shut my mouth. The more the Vance estate shielded my family, the more I talked to Julian. "You have a spectacularly terrifying family," I informed him one night while adjusting his pillows. "Your mother adopted me emotionally in less than a week. Your cousin is desperate for your title. Your lawyer frightens grown men into visible aging. Your doctor uses the word promising far too casually. And you, my dear husband, remain unfairly breathtaking and publicly unproductive." Suddenly, his eyelids fluttered. I stopped breathing entirely. "Julian." Another distinct flutter, then stillness. I sprinted out to grab Eleanor. Dr. Sterling confirmed the breakthrough within minutes. "He is right on the precipice, Eleanor." Eleanor held my hand so tightly my fingers turned numb. That night, I sat by Julian's side until the sun broke over the horizon. No jokes. No sarcasm. Just a soft whisper, "If you wake up, please be gentle. I know society says you are ruthless, and frankly, that aligns with your bone structure. But I have told you all my secrets. The embarrassing ones. The expensive ones. If you judge me, I may have to spiritually separate from you." His thumb lightly brushed against my knuckles. I let out a tear, then immediately wiped it away. "Do not tell a soul. I have an elite reputation to uphold." Then, Leo Sterling materialized at the worst possible moment. Leo had been my almost romance before the financial collapse. We had never officially dated, but everyone in our circle knew he was infatuated with me. I had liked him too, in that soft, superficial way you like someone before life teaches you the brutal reality of a balance sheet. After the bankruptcy, Leo evaporated. Now, seeing me as Mrs. Vance, he suddenly rediscovered my contact information. He approached me after a high-end charity gala. "Maya." I turned slowly. "Leo, I see your timing remains strictly decorative." He looked genuinely pained. "I heard about your arrangement. I should have been there to protect you." "Yes, you should have," I agreed flatly. That caught him off guard. "I want to help you escape this now," Leo pressed, stepping closer. "You don't have to remain legally shackled to a man trapped in a hospital bed. I know you married for pure survival, but you deserve real affection." My smile faded. Behind him, near a marble column, Victor stood watching us with a predatory grin. "Of course. I deserve many things, Leo," I said, my voice dropping into a cold, clear register. "But you didn't offer any of them when I was standing on the curb with nothing. And Julian is my husband. He cannot even." Finish that sentence, I interrupted sharply, "and you will find out exactly how heavy this rhinestone clutch is." Leo froze. Victor's smirk faltered. I raised my voice just enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "I am Mrs. Julian Vance. Take your belated rescue fantasy somewhere else." Eleanor appeared beside me like elegant thunder. Is there an issue here, Maya? None at all, I replied smoothly. Leo was just departing with his delayed carriage. Leo left. Victor no longer looked amused. That night, I reported the entire drama to Julian. Leo Sterling tried to stage a dramatic rescue today. An utterly tragic performance. 3 out of 10. Excellent hair, abysmal timing. The monitor stayed perfectly steady. I told him explicitly that I am Mrs. Vance. Beep. I leaned in closer to the guardrail. Oh? That pleased you? Surprisingly possessive for a sleeping man. Suddenly, his fingers moved deliberately, wrapping around my hand. I whispered, Julian, wake up soon. Your mother and I are trying incredibly hard, but your extended family is populated entirely by idiots and I am exhausted. A low, rough, gravelly voice cut through the quiet room. Which idiot should I liquidate first? I fell directly out of my chair. Actually fell. My knee collided with the plush carpet, and my pride took an even harder hit. Julian Vance's eyes were wide open. Dark, intensely focused, and completely alive. I stared up at him from the floor. He stared right back down at me. His voice was hoarse from disuse. I heard every single word, Mrs. Vance. My soul immediately exited my physical body, filed for emergency relocation, and moved to Switzerland. I crawled back onto the velvet chair with as much dignity as a woman who had just been spiritually assassinated could manage. You heard absolutely nothing. I heard enough to know that I am unfairly breathtaking and publicly unproductive. No. And that I am your gorgeous piece of high-end furniture investment. You were in a coma, I stammered, covering my burning face. The bar for comparison was exceptionally low. And if my mother and you fell off a yacht, I am legally required to save you first, because Eleanor can simply hire her own Coast Guard rescue fleet. I buried my face in my hands. Please go back into the fog. Julian's mouth curved into a slow, devastating smile. Not a chance. Eleanor rushed in 2 minutes later because I had let out a scream so piercing Dr. Sterling later classified it as an excellent diagnostic indicator of lung capacity. When she saw Julian sitting up, she froze at the threshold. For the first exact moment since I had met her, the unbreakable Eleanor Vance looked entirely fragile. Julian, she breathed. His dark eyes softened instantly. Mom. Eleanor broke down, rushing to his side, weeping into his hands, and I used the emotional distraction to tactfully slide toward the exit. Julian's hoarse voice cut across the room, stopping me dead. Maya. I turned around, lifting my chin defensively. I am not fleeing. I am merely providing a respectful window for familial intimacy. You explicitly told me you never retreat unless someone threatens your American Express card, he countered, his gaze tracking me with dangerous amusement. Eleanor laughed through her tears, and I pointed an accusing finger at my husband. This is precisely why medical privacy laws should prohibit patients from retaining conscious memories. The awake husband phase was an absolute corporate nightmare. A gorgeous, devastating nightmare. Julian's recovery had to be meticulous, and I became the absolute enforcer of his schedule because I had 6 full months of accumulated grievances to settle with a captive audience who could finally talk back. He teased me mercilessly. One afternoon, I brought him a bowl of artisanal soup. He inspected it closely. Is this dietary compliance because I am officially your most emotionally stable domestic partner? You stripped yourself of that title the exact second you began articulating vowels, I shot back, adjusting his medical pillow. He caught my wrist lightly, his touch warm. Careful, Maya. You once noted that dominant CEOs who grab wrists deserve a swift elbow. I pulled my hand back, smirking. I stand by my architectural principles. Good. So do I. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto mine. I heard the trashy romance novels too. Woman, you cannot escape my shadow. I launched the throw pillow directly at his face. He laughed so hard Dr. Sterling had to run a respiratory check. The corporate world, however, quickly realized the Vance heir had not returned as a fragile convalescent, but as a man who had spent 6 months listening to every knife being sharpened behind his back. Victor panicked instantly. He attempted to force a snap board meeting before Julian was cleared to leave the estate, aiming to push through restructuring clauses regarding executive authority. Eleanor went in Julian's stead. I accompanied her. Julian remained upstairs under heavy medical protest. Victor stood before the board of directors with a mask of profound sorrow. Julian is awake, yes, but a full recovery will take years. The empire requires stable, uncompromised leadership. I raised my hand from the gallery. Translation: he wants to seize the gavel before the real chairman can stand up. Victor's polished smile fractured. Maya, this is international commerce. You are only sitting in that chair because Julian lacked the capacity to choose a spouse. Actually, I chose perfectly. A deep, commanding voice echoed from the heavy double doors. The entire boardroom froze. Julian stood framed in the entrance, leaning lightly on a sleek carbon fiber cane, pale but imposing, flanked by security. I bolted out of my seat. Julian Vance, your physician strictly prohibited dramatic corporate entrances. He looked at me, his mouth twitching. You explicitly labeled my relatives as parasites, Maya. A prompt extermination is a verified medical necessity. He walked deliberately to my side, leaving Victor's face completely devoid of color. Julian surveyed the room with absolute authority. My wife has been speaking on my behalf for 6 months. Now I will speak for her. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Victor has spent my absence attempting to alter proxy votes, manipulate our compliance staff, and actively intimidate my wife while I was unable to intervene. Eleanor has documented every transaction. Victoria Lewis has the formal filings. Victoria marched into the room right on cue, lifting a thick crimson folder. Legal women truly possess the monopoly on flawless entrances. Victor attempted to laugh it off. This is a theatrical absurdity. Julian looked at him, his expression devoid of warmth. Victor, even while clinically unresponsive, I managed to make better executive decisions than you did completely awake. A senior board member coughed loudly to stifle a laugh. Victor lost his administrative access to the Vance Trust that exact afternoon, his corporate credentials frozen pending a forensic audit. It was the high society equivalent of being told to sit in the corner and reconsider one's entire personality. Philip Quinn didn't fare any better. Faced with Victoria's flawless asset tracking and Julian's quiet backing, he signed a devastating settlement. Clara recovered every dollar he had attempted to hide, walking away entirely whole. His mistress quickly discovered that Philip's financial promises were completely worthless once the court finished dividing his remaining assets. Leo Sterling sent a massive, deeply polite arrangement of congratulations and wisely decided to keep his distance forever. One afternoon, Eleanor handed me a set of heavy brass keys. Sterling Manor had been fully bought back from the receivers. I stood on the overgrown lawn with Clara, looking at the grand facade of our childhood home. The windows were dusty, the gardens wild, and the memories heavy. It was the place I thought I desperately needed to feel human again. But when I looked back toward the driveway, Julian was leaning against the car, watching me quietly with absolutely no demands in his eyes. Eleanor stood beside him. Clara stood beside me. A family I had never anticipated, built entirely from a crisis. I gripped the keys tightly. I want to fully restore the estate, I told Julian, walking back to him. But I don't want to live here. It's my past. I needed it back to prove I existed, but I don't need to hide in it to feel safe. Julian took my hand, his thumb brushing my knuckles. Then where do you want to reside? I smiled up at him. With my exceptionally vocal, awake husband. Our formal vow renewal took place 3 months later in the private gardens of the Vance estate. I wore a breathtaking white gown, this time, not as a desperate girl signing a survival contract, but as a woman completely in control of her destiny. Before the ceremony, Julian found me near the lavender bushes. He looked devastating in a black tuxedo. He held out his hand. The first time, you married a man who couldn't vow back. This time, ask me anything. I narrowed my eyes playfully. Will your mother continue to provide high-end snacks? Unconditionally. Will I retain full control over the master thermostat? Negotiable, but likely. Can I still complain to you every single night? I explicitly expect it. Will you pretend you forgot the highly embarrassing parts of my monologues? Julian stepped closer, his dark eyes softening into something profoundly warm. Never. I waited half a year to answer them. I love you, Maya Sterling Vance. Not just because you kept the vultures at bay, but because you walked into the quietest, darkest room of my life and refused to let me fade away. I blinked back rapid tears, taking his hand firmly. Then yes. But from this moment on, if I insult your relatives, you are legally obligated to provide immediate tactical backup. I always have, he whispered. We walked down the aisle together to the sound of Eleanor's joyous tears. There was no more silence between us. No clinical monitors, no bankruptcy anxieties, and no survival clauses. Just a man who had heard my absolute worst jokes, my deepest fears, and my loudest confessions, and had still chosen to hold on.